Chapter 8, Lesson 2, The History of Brazil, on page 248 in your textbook. You're also welcome to have out your online textbook, and again, you always have the feature for listening if you click the headphones up here and then press play on each page. In front of you, you will also need the History of Brazil guided reading activity for our lesson. You'll notice that there are three sections that we'll be breaking this history of Brazil down into. The very first is the early history, in which our skill that we're looking at practicing while we're reading is to sequence things and put them in order. So you're given 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different historical events. You have to put those properly, label those properly in order on this sequence here from the top to the bottom. In the second portion, we're learning about the colonial rule as the European countries come to colonize this region in South America, and we're looking specifically at the skill of cause and effect. As in, we're given a cause, what was the effect of that event happening during this time of colonial rule. Lastly, you're looking at independent Brazil, in which you're going to assess our reading through the lens of true and false. Use your textbook to decide if each statement is true or false. If the statement is false, rewrite it correctly in the blank provided below. Let's get started. As we look at the history of Brazil, our goal is to describe the indigenous peoples, to discuss colonial rule in Brazil, and explain how Brazil became independent. What I'd like to do for this very first portion of sequencing is use the ability for us to listen to something and hear it in order, and then by rewriting it, get to an understanding of how things happened in sequence. So we're going to just look at some of these main headlines and then listen to this section, as it'll help us fill in appropriately as this plays out. Overall, in the early history of Brazil, you're going to learn that Brazil became a Portuguese territory after the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed. The Tupi people lived along the coast and in the rainforest south of the Amazon rainforest, so they were the indigenous people here. And the natives of the lowland rainforest were mainly farmers. Farther south, they were more nomadic, meaning they moved from place to place. Let's listen to that early portion and then fill in our notes for this early sequence.
Lesson 2. History of Brazil. It matters because Brazil is one of the world's leading industrial powers. Early history. Guiding question. How did Brazil's early peoples live? In 1493, Christopher Columbus returned to Spain with news of his explorations and of new lands. The Spanish worried that neighboring Portugal, a powerful seafaring rival, would try to claim these lands for itself. So, they asked the Pope to find a solution. The Pope decided that all new lands west of a certain line should belong to Spain. Lands east of the line would belong to Portugal. The two countries agreed to this division in 1494 by signing the Treaty of Tordesillas. Almost nothing was known of the region's geography, so neither side realized how unequal the division was. Almost all of the Americas lay west of the line, which became Spanish territory. The only exception was the eastern part of South America, which became Portuguese territory. Today, this part of South America is Brazil. That is why Brazil is the only South American country that has a Portuguese heritage. Indigenous populations. The first Portuguese ships stopped in Brazil in 1500. Their destination was India, so they did not stay in Brazil for long. They had peaceful encounters with some of the indigenous or native peoples who lived along the coast. The Portuguese commander, Pedro Cabral, claimed the land for Portugal. After just 10 days, the Portuguese left. They had no idea of the vast region and many peoples included in Cabral's claim. The people the Portuguese met were the Tupi. They lived along the coast and in the rainforests south of the Amazon River, where they grew cassava, corn, sweet potatoes, beans, and peanuts. They hunted fish and other water animals with arrows and harpoons from large log canoes, but they did little hunting on land. Brazil's native peoples had lived there for more than 10,000 years when the Portuguese arrived. Estimates are that the population was between 2 million and 6 million by 1500. Besides the Tupi, it included the Arawak and Carib people of the northern Amazon and coast. and the Nambiquara in the drier grasslands and highlands. These are not the names of native peoples. They were Brazil's four main language groups. Each group comprised many different peoples. Daily life. Like the Tupi, Brazil's other lowland and rainforest peoples were mainly farmers. They lived in permanent, self-governing villages and practiced slash-and-burn agriculture. This is a method of farming in forests that involves cutting down trees and burning away underbrush to create fields for growing crops. Farther south, most of the Nambiquara of the Brazilian highlands were nomads, people who move from place to place and have no permanent home. In the dry season, they lived as hunter-gatherers, people who get their food by hunting, fishing, and collecting seeds, roots, and other parts of trees and wild plants. In the wet season, they built temporary villages and practiced slash-and-burn agriculture. Europeans arrive. For more than 30 years after Cabral's visit, the Portuguese did not pay much attention to Brazil. Their main focus was on their colonies and trade in Asia. Their trading ships sailed south and east around Africa on their way to Asia. Portuguese sailors established a few trading posts along Brazil's coast and collected Brazil wood. The red dye extracted from this wood was highly valued in Europe. It was because of this trade that the Portuguese named the region Brazil. The valuable Brazil wood trade made other Europeans more interested in Brazil. French traders began collecting the wood and shipping it to France. To bring Brazil under tighter Portuguese control, Portugal's King John III established a permanent colony and government there. The first Portuguese settlers arrived in 1533.
So to put these items in order, we should look at this sequence and then appropriately allocate those to the spaces below. So here's our order in no shape or form right now. King John established a permanent colony. Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. The first Portuguese ships stopped in Brazil. Native people of Brazil farmed and hunted the land for more than 10,000 years. French traders began collecting wood from Brazil and shipping it to France. Columbus returned to Spain with news of new lands. The first of those is before there's any connection to the European exploration or European colonization. So we want to put in the first one is the native people of Brazil farmed and hunted the land for 10,000 years. Now, the idea that it's 10,000 years old doesn't match with our biblical representation, but the idea that there were people there before does, in the form of how those people could have traveled from there from the time of the redistribution of people in the entire world after the Tower of Babel, as people's languages were dispersed and people then left all of this one location. So the idea of 10,000 years doesn't match up with our timeline in terms of biblical creation, but it is a representation that there were native peoples living in Brazil before the time of the Europeans. Then there's this age of exploration that's happening in Europe, and Columbus returned to Spain with news of new lands in this region. So you have Christopher Columbus and his famous exploits. You got the conquistadors that are taking over different parts of Mexico, and now there's a competition for the different peoples in these areas to, or the Europeans, to colonize these new regions. In the third box, Spain and Portugal signed this Treaty of Tordesillas because they're both competing for this new land, except both of these places have ties to the Roman Catholic Church, and they're going to listen to what the Pope says. So in your actual reading, it showed a picture of what that treaty looked like. He picked a line that was known on the map as going north and south, and separated what was to the east of that line as Brazil, to the west of that line as Spain, and actually ended up dividing things relatively unevenly because you didn't know what this actually looked like at the time. Now, in today's modern time, Brazil is all of what is the green area here, and that is the Portuguese-speaking portion of South America. And the yellow here is all of the Spanish-speaking, or the Spain's colonial exploits in this region. So you can see that landmass-wise now, it kind of looks like they're even because Brazil is the largest country in this entire region. But overall, this split went way in favor of the Spanish. Next, in terms of what happened, you've got the first Portuguese ships that are stopping in Brazil to claim this region. Afterwards, in box 5, the French traders began collecting wood from Brazil and shipping it to France. So you have people that come there and find that there is a plentiful amount of resources, and they want to take advantage of those things that are there. Now, in order for France to not want to take a claim at the same area and other countries to not compete for it as well, the Portuguese have to do something about that. So King John established a permanent colony in Brazil to thwart off any other type of establishment or any other challenge to this land from other countries, such as France. So that permanent colony is established, claiming Brazil as all of Portugal's, and you have the development of this region in the terms of the colonial rule at this time. Now, as we read about colonial rule, I want us to look at that cause and effect skill, but we should practice it before we go ahead and apply it in the next portion of our reading. Let's just quickly review what we've read so far. What was the Treaty of Tordesillas? Treaty of Tordesillas divided lands east and west between Spain and Portugal so that neither country could claim all of the land for itself. There was a cause, this problem between these two countries that didn't want to go to conflict with each other, so they took it to the Pope, and the Pope says, split it down the middle, and it ended up benefiting Spain much more than the other. What year did the Treaty of Sales go into effect? This was signed in 1494, right during this age of exploration. What caused Brazil to have a unique cultural heritage? Well, after this treaty was signed and went into effect, the eastern parts of South America, where Brazil is located, became Portuguese territory. Well, this is the only part of South America that's actually Portuguese. All of the rest of it is Spanish-speaking because of the Spanish colonization in all of the lands that were granted to Spain. What caused Europeans to become more interested in Brazil? Their valuable Brazil wood. Obviously, this huge, massive rainforest in there, tons and tons and tons and tons of this wood that's there, and there's a specific red dye that comes out of this wood that'd be valuable for clothing and textiles back in Europe. This became a valued asset that people wanted, so they were willing to go there and try to harvest this asset. What did King John III do as a result of French traders coming into the region to collect Brazil wood? He set up a permanent colony and government in Brazil so that the Portuguese would be the controlling and governing body in that region. Why did he do this? Well, it's to eliminate any other type of competition between French and other Europeans on this region. If they've got an established colony, they've got an established presence there, there's not going to be that same type of competition. How does Portugal move forward? Portugal's rule of Brazil lasted for more than 300 years. The rise of large plantations growing sugarcane pushed ranching westward, with colonists enslaving native people as laborers, and the discovery of gold in the 1690s and of diamonds in the 1720s led to the population boom in Brazil. Let's take a look at our cause and effect as we go through our reading. Number 1 says, King John gave huge pieces of land in Brazil to wealthy supporters. What's the effect of such an action? Colonial rule on page 250. Portugal's rule of Brazil lasted more than 300 years. During the time, Portuguese settlements spread all along the coast. Explorers and other travelers traveled up rivers and deep into Brazil's interior. The expansion brought wealth to Portugal, though much of it came as a great cost to Brazil's indigenous people. Portuguese conquest. King John III gave wealthy supporters huge tracts of land in Brazil. These tracts extended west from the coast about 150 miles inland. In return, the people who received a land grant were responsible for developing it. They founded cities and gave land to colonists to farm. So these people are given this land, and that their expectation is to develop it, get it colonized, get more people living on this area, or get it prepared to produce something in terms of the land value and the farm value. Number 2, colonists could not do all the work required to farm their land. Because the colonists could not do all the work that was required, they soon began enslaving nearby native peoples as laborers. Many of them resisted and were killed. Thousands more died from exposure to European diseases to which they had no natural resistance. Others fled into Brazil's interior. These conditions and other complaints caused King John to end the land grant system in 1549. He put Brazil under royal control and sent a governor from Portugal to rule the colony. So if the colonists couldn't do all the work themselves, the people from Portugal, they enslaved the native people to do the work for them instead. Number 3, many native people resisted slavery and were killed. Others died from European disease, and others fled into Brazil's interior. In response to this, King John ends the land grant system and sends a governor to rule over it. So instead of giving the power to his wealthy supporters and his people, he's going to end this kind of humanitarian issue and send his own governing force there to take care of any of these issues. The spread of Christianity. The new governor brought more colonists with him. They included a number of Jesuit Catholic priests who belonged to a missionary group called the Society of Jesus. The king asked the Jesuits to go out to Brazil to help native peoples and convert them to Christianity. Those who converted were settled and in special Jesuit villages and were protected from slavery. So if you were a native of Brazil, you had the option. Well, either I fight against this oppressive force that's coming in, or I join their religion and then they'll leave me alone in terms of not forcing me to work. These Portuguese colonists who held enslaved people complained to the king about the Jesuit work. In 1574, he ruled the native peoples who did not live in Jesuit villages could be enslaved only if they were captured in war. The ruling sent Jesuits into Brazil's interior to protect and convert people there. Slave hunters also moved into the interior to attack and enslave the native peoples. Cattlemen and prospectors followed, slowly spreading development inland. Sugar and gold. As Brazil's sugar industry expanded, cattlemen needed new land. The rise of large sugarcane plantations, mainly in the northeast, pushed ranching westward. In the 1600s, sugar became Brazil's main export and Portugal's greatest source of wealth. Coffee and cotton plantations also developed. The discovery of gold in the eastern highlands in the 1690s further boosted the development of the interior. Towns sprang up as thousands of colonists rushed to the area. Large numbers of new colonists arrived from Europe as well. The discovery of diamonds in the region in the 1720s added to the population boom. Number 4, Brazil's sugar industry expanded and cattlemen needed new land. If they needed new land, they're going to go the only place that they can, and that's going to be inward or westward. Number 5, as the number of plantations and mines increased, so did the need for workers. What's going to happen next as you again need more workers? Where are these workers going to come from? Plantations, agriculture, and mining required large numbers of workers. This increased the need for enslaved workers. When native populations could not fill the need, the Portuguese began importing large numbers of enslaved Africans. By the 1780s, more than 150,000 enslaved African workers were in the mining districts. This was twice the size of the Portuguese population. By 1820, some 1.1 million enslaved people accounted for nearly one-third of Brazil's total population. Unfortunately, as the number of plantation and mines increased, so the need for workers, where did these powerful European countries get those workers? They would often go to slavery in the form of the slave trade that was happening in the Columbian Exchange. Slaves were brought from Africa, and the number of enslaved people in Brazil grew to over 1 million. In the next portion, you're going to independently read about the independence of Brazil. See what I did there? While you're reading about how Brazil becomes independent, I want you to, again, see that sequence, see the cause and effect, but then put it into the terms of is it true or false based on the statements that are provided on your guided reading activity. Hopefully you can use those skills that we've practiced in the first two sections and apply those in this section as you're deciphering what is true and false from your reading comprehension. God's blessings on finishing that up on your own.